Now? It's not time. Crazy. I tell people.
All right, here we go. Good evening, everyone. Tonight we are learning Maseches Pesachim, Daf Daled. Yes, take one of those. I will be screen sharing for when we're going to be learning within the Shulchan Aruch to kind of look at the distillation of our learning thus far. And we'll learn a couple of dinim that are halacha l'maisa, some of which we've already touched upon and some of which we have yet to learn. So let's get started. As you may recall, yesterday we were learning about the sugya of Lashon Naki. We're learning about the sugya of making sure that we speak with a clean language. Now, that was after learning about the sugya of not speaking b'lashon meguna. So there's the sur meira, and then there's the asay tov. First, we have to make sure we don't speak poorly. And then the higher level of that, of course, we shouldn't speak poorly. The higher level of that is to speak naki in a way which is very pure. And we're going to learn a few stories still today in connection to yesterday's sugya. We're 8 lines from the bottom of the page on Daf Gimel Amud Beis, second of the last short line. Rav Kahana Chalash. Rav Kahana was unfortunately ill. Shadruha Rabbanan Rabbi Yoshua bereid Rav Idi. The rabbis sent Rabbi Yoshua bereid Rav Idi to go visit Rav Kahana. Amru le zil b'dok ma'idine. Go check and see how he's doing. So he went there. Ashkeche, and he found denach nafshe, that unfortunately Rav Kahana had passed away. On the spot, kar'e lilavushe, he tore his clothes. And then the ahadre lekare lachore, so he tore his clothes on the right side. We only tear kriya on the left for a parent. Otherwise, all other kriyos that are torn are on the right. And then he reversed his shirt in a way so when people would see him, they wouldn't immediately know that Rav Kahana had died. Uvachi, and then he cried, ve'asi, and then he came back home. Now, there are a lot of very important halacha l'maisa things to learn from this. First of all, he was not a child of Rav Kahana. Why did he tear kriya? So the din is, this is also, I believe it's explicitly quoted in Shulchan Aruch, that when your Rebbe Muvhak dies or when the Gadol Hador dies, you are supposed to tear kriya. So in those circumstances, they tell stories about when Rav Moshe Feinstein died, that people were tearing kriya all over the world. They tear on the right or tear at the bottom of the beged. That's what doctors do. And there are doctors who see death all the time. When you're present at the Yetzias HaNeshama, it's also appropriate to tear kriya. So a lot of doctors will just take a little scissors, they'll cut a little bit on the bottom of their garment and just tear a little bit to be Yotzei Kriya for Yetzias HaNeshama, just a mashahu. Doesn't have the same din of Kriyas Tefach when you're doing so for an immediate relative, but nevertheless, you can see here, the Rabbi Yoshua bereid Rav Idi was giving the appropriate halachic kavod to the passing of Rav Kahana. And then now back to where we are, we're 5 lines from the bottom. So then he came back to the Chevra, and they said, Amru lei noch nafshe, did Rav Kahana pass away? What did he say? Amar lahu analo ka'amina. I'm not going to say the words out loud. It's not going to exit my lips. Umotzi diba huksil, based on the pasuk of saying that if you say something that's not nice, you are a fool. So he didn't want to say it, but it was over time evidenced that in fact he passed away. Another story, way less significant in regards to passing away, but still a story about Lashon Naki. Says the Gemara, Yochanan Chakuka. Nafak l'kirya. So Yochanan from the city of Chakuk, according to some, that's what Rashi says. Rashi says it's his nickname, actually. Other Meforshim explain that it's a city, either from Chakuk or that was his nickname. Nafak l'kirya, so he went out to the village. Ki asa, when he got there, Amrule, they said to him, Chitin nasu yafos. Tell me, how's the grain this year? How's the wheat grain this year? And he didn't want to say it was bad. So he answered by answering about animal feed. What did he say? He said as follows. Amarlem se'orin nasu yafos, the barley's looking good. Well, minus the fact that we put it in cholent, that's not a food that we normally eat. It's animal food in general. So they said back to him with a snap, they said, Amrulay, they said to him, you know what? Say uvaser lasusim alachamor. Why don't you go tell the good news to the animals that eat the barley? Thank you very much. Just tell me what's going on with the wheat. You're giving me about animal feed. I'm hungry. I need to buy some food. As the pasuk writes, this is food that goes to other people, and therefore you're talking about things that are for animals. So the Gemara says, I mean, you're right, but at least it was Lashon Naki. He didn't say the wheat was bad. So then the Gemara says, last line, Gimel Amud Beis, my havalela meimar. What was his other option? What could he have said that would have been a better formulation to indicate that the wheat was bad? So it says the Gemara, he still could have maintained Lashon Naki. He still could have maintained this higher level of speaking by saying what? He could have said, Ishtakad, last year, Nasu Chitin Yafos, last year the food was good. At least this way, he's still talking about human consumption, human food. Or he could have said, Inami Adashim Nasu Yafos, lentils. We know from Esav and Yaakov, we know that lentils is a food that people eat. Last Rashi on the page says, Machal Adam, this is a food that people eat. So the people in his community were kind of annoyed that he gave an answer that was lashon naki, but in animal feed. Don't give me animal feed. Talk to me about people feed. You could have said your lashon naki in two various ways. You should have done that. Top of Daf Daled Amud Aleph, yet another story. Rav, the famous Rav, the early Amora, Rav bar achuha de Rav Chia uvar achte. Okay, he was the nephew twice over of Rav Chia. Here's how it works. Rav Chia had a brother. His father was the same. Rav Chia had a father. His father had wife number one. They had a son, and they had Rav Chia. Okay, and then the father also had another child with another woman, a daughter and a son. So the two half siblings on each side married and had a child. They had Rav. So Rav's parents were the siblings of Rav Chia, which means he was twice over an uncle. That's the case here. This is like a Yevamos sugya, almost, not as hard. So the Gemara says that Rav bar Achuha de Rav Chia bar Achte, he was the son of Rav Chia's brother and the son of Rav Chia's sister. Kisalik lahasam, and then he went to go visit Mishpacha. Amrulay, and his father's name was Ivo. Amrulay, Ivo Kaim, Rav Chia said, is my brother Ivo your father? Is he alive? So what did Rav say back? Amrulay, Ima Kayemes. Did you ask if my mother's alive? Your sister, right? Because remember, it's Rav Chia's brother and sister, just half sisters on each side. So then Amar Le, okay, fine, I'll ask you. Ima Kayemes, is your mother alive? Amar Le, Rav said back to him, this is a girsa change, it has to be Abba, because you're not allowed to call your father by your first name, Siman Reish Mem, in Yoredeh. You cannot call your parents by their first name. Amar Le, Abba, Kayam, you're going to ask about my father being alive? Why are we going through this circular conversation? Obviously, Rav was trying to indicate something, and at that moment, Rav Chia picked up that both his brother and sister, each the parents of Rav, had passed away. At that moment, Amar Le, Rav Chia said, L'shame, to his servant, Chalutz li minali, take off my shoes, v'holich kli acharai lebeis hamerchatz, and bring my kalim, bring my collection of items that I need for the beis hamerchatz. Story ended. Now, what did we see from here, which is just connected to our sugya? What we saw from here is that you should speak b'lashon naki. That was similar to the story we saw on the bottom of the page, where Rabbi Yeshua Bereder Rav Idi did not want to say the words that Rav Kahana had passed away. He did it beremes. He did it in a more gentle way. It says the Gemara, Shma mina tlas. I learned three things from this story. Number one, Shma mina avel aser b'ne'ilas sandal. The first thing we learn is that you're not, as an avel, one is not allowed to wear ne'ilas sandal. They're not allowed to wear leather shoes. Okay, a lot of the shoes have pieces of leather on them. Some of them have just a trim of leather. Good shilos, fine. But b'kitzur, you're not allowed to wear leather shoes when a person's in avelus. Ushma mina. We also learn a side din that shmur rechoka eina noheges el yom echad. Shmur rechoka is a unique din within the world of avelus. A shmur rechoka is if a person hears that one of their family members has died, but they hear at least 30 days after the family member dies, they don't sit a full shiva. All they do is one act, one maisa that indicates shiva, and then they can get up from shiva right away. Ushma mina. What do we also see from the part of the story where Reb Chia told his servant that he should pack a bag to go to the Beis HaMerchatz? We also learned Mixas Hayom Kikulo, that part of the day is considered like the whole day as it relates to Shiva. What do we see in Shiva houses? On the seventh day in the morning, they have Shacharis. People usually sit down, they say Hamokim Menachem, the family gets up, they walk around the block, and the whole Shiva is over. At that point, you're done. That's called Mixas Hayom Kikulo. And we see that all of these dinim played out here in the story with Rav Chia and with Rav. The Gemara interjects now, somewhat difficult to understand exactly why this Gemara is here. It was just kind of off the page a little bit, as it were. And the Gemara says about 10 lines down, Hahu da Amar Donu Dini. Everything this person said, he wants to go to Bezdin. He never wants to deal with you directly. Oh, you want to make a business deal? Let's go speak to the Dayan. I don't want to trust you on your own. Let's go speak to the Dayan. If you find a personality like that, says the Gemara, Amre Shma Minami Dun Kaasi. He's probably from Shevet Dun. Based on the pasuk, Dichsiv Dan Yadina Moke Achad Shivtei Yisrael. That it's probably the case. It's part of his wiring to be done, to be in a bezdin. So that's why this person is very litigious. Next case and similar. Hahu Dahava Ka'azil Va'amar, a person who says, Akef Yama Asisna Bir Yasa, I'm going to build my house on the waterfront. Badku, they checked about this person. Va'ashkechuhu Demizvulun Ka'asi. This person is likely to come from Shevet Zvulun. How so? Dichsiv Zivulun Lechof Yamim Yishkon. Zevulun's always going to be by the water. So these two Gemaras strangely placed here. I don't know what the methodologies were of the Savoraim when they wove the Gemara together. Nevertheless, it is here, and we will learn it. And if a person takes you to court a lot, they may be from Shevet Dan. If people love the water, they always build on the water. They are possibly from Zevulun. Let's get back to Hilchos Pesachim. Now, we had already concluded yesterday, after having learned two blot, that there is no question that when the Mishnah says Orla Arba Asar, Bod Kenas Chametz or Haner, we know that the mitzvah of Bdikas Chametz, the mitzvah derabanan of Bdikas Chametz, is on the night of the 14th. We'll learn a little bit more detail in the Shulchan Aruch and Mishnah Berurah later, but let's continue for the moment inside. Says the Gemara, third of the way down. The hashta, the kaimalan dilakule alma or ortahu. Now that we know that everybody, referencing of course Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda from the very opening of the Gemara and Daf Beis, now that we know that everyone agrees that or is orta, namely now that we know that the mitzvah derabanan of bdikas chametz is on that night, when we do it on the night of the 14th of Nisan, michti, let's see. Bein l'Rav Meir, uvein I'm sorry, that's not what the word says. Bein l'Rav Yehuda, uvein l'Rav Meir, whether or not we follow the Tana of Rav Yehuda or Rav Meir, they both hold that chametz eino aser el mishei shaos ulemala. When does chametz become aser midoraisa? From the end of the 6th hour and beyond. So says the Gemara, if that's when the Isser starts, if the Isser Doraisa of Chametz starts at the end of the 6th hour, then v'nivdok b'shis. Shis, Aramaic, shis, sheis, tough and shin are interchangeable. V'nivdok b'sheish. B'shis, just check in the beginning of the 6th hour. Let's say we had a perfect day. Sun rises at 6, sun sets at 6. So that way it makes the clock easier. So when's the end of the 6th hour? The whole first hour, starting at 6 is hour 1. Hour 7 is number 2, 8 is 3, 9 is 4, 10 is 5, 11 is 6. We're getting toward the end there. And so at the end of that hour, it's going to be chametz. Just do bdikas chametz, b'shis. Just do it in the beginning of the 6th hour. Why the night before? We know it's the night before, but why is it the night before? Says the Gemara, v'nivdok b'shis. That's when we should be checking. V'chi tema. And if you're going to argue zrizin makdim in lemitzvos, you're going to tell me, because Jews, we have a lot of zrizus. We try to do mitzvos early in the morning. That's great. But if you're going to argue zrizin makdim in the mitzvos, that the reason why we do it the night before is because of zrizus, no, that doesn't work. Then nivdok mitzafra. Then all we would have had to do is go back to the morning after Shacharis. Why? Dichsi. Uvayom hashmini imol b'sar or laso. On the 8th day, we have to do a bris milah. Vitanya, the Brisa writes on that pasuk, kol hayom kulo kasher lamila. The entire day is kosher to do bris milah. As long as the sun is up, the bris is good. Ella shezrizin makdim lemitzvos shene'emar vayashkem Avraham baboker. When Avram was commanded to do the Akedah, when did he leave? Not the night before, in the morning. So even if you're going to argue that the reason why we're doing Bdikas Chametz early is because it's reason Makdimin, even Avraham didn't go to the night before to leave for the Akedah. He left in the morning. So even if you're going to argue Zrizus, we only would have had to go back to the morning. Back to our question. Why is Bdikas Chametz at night? If you're arguing that it should be because it's Zrizus, it should have been in the morning. On the morning of the 14th, when we wake up. Why do it the night before? Answers the Gemara. Doesn't sound like a very halachic answer, but it sounds like a very practical answer. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman, a twofold answer. Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. B'nei Adam mitzuyin b'vateim. Number one, people are home. No one's at work. No one's in the base medrash. You're home now. So we're going to do it at night. And number two, the or haner yafe lebdika. Best way to look in the chorin who's stuck in the cracks and crevices in the room is when the room is dark and you shine a flashlight or a light. But when the light's on from the ceiling, it shadows all the cracks and crevices. It's very hard to see. So their homes were not like ours. We're sitting, it's pitch black outside right now. We're sitting here with 25 electric lights on top of us. But if we lived in a house where they had one lamp somewhere, it would have shadowed everything. So you pick up the candle and you move it so you can see better. And it's better to do that at night. For these two halachic reasons, we push B'dikas Chametz not by the 6th hour, not even Zrizus to the morning of the 14th, but to the night prior for these two reasons that Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak states. Number one, people are home at night. And number two, because you can see better with a candle at night.
The problem is we're saying that people are going to be home to burn the chametz, or they're around the day, they're not supposed to work Erev Pesach, all these different things anyway. So isn't that a problem? Like people are around. People are around.
Well, the culture was different then. The culture was different then in the following way, which is that once the sun set, people came home. It's just not like our culture because we have an electric culture. Right. In fact, this played in halacha l'maisa. The way it played in was according to a very unique shita in Hilchos Basar B'chalav. There was a shita, the Gemara says this, that we have to wait between meat and milk, bein seuda le seuda. So there's a shita that says, it's a Yekesh shita mentioned by the Pri Chadash on the side of the Shulchan Aruch, that you only have to wait 3 hours between meat and milk. Why only 3 hours? Because when people would come home when it was dark, they'd eat. At the earliest point of the year, that would be approximately 3 hours when the sun would set early. So people were just home then. It's just not, you're asking a modern day question, like, well, okay, but just come home, like just do it. It's just, everyone was home at that point. The street lights were nil. It was dangerous outside. There were animals, there were people. It just wasn't a safe culture. So people were just pushing home, the whole family. It got dark out, everyone was home. So that's probably, I presume, a little bit of a depth as to why this was the case. Amar Abaye, an extension of this idea of doing it at night when everyone's home, don't go to the base medrash. Amar Abaye, Hilkach, therefore. What's the therefore on? The therefore is on Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Because people should be home, and because that the night is good for Badika, Tzurba me Rabbanan is like a catchphrase that refers to Talmidei Chachamim. These rabbis, these Talmidei Chachamim, lo liftach beidnei, they should not start learning a sugya, or to detzleisar denage arbasar, at the night when you're traversing dark, when it's becoming dark from 13th going into the 14th, don't start a sugya then. Dilma mishchale shmaise, because maybe you'll get engrossed in your learning. The asi le'inuye mi mitzvah, and you'll come to forego, to accidentally skip the mitzvah derabanan of bdikas chametz. So therefore, you're not allowed to learn then. Let's take out the sheets. For those of you who have, I'll do a screen share for those of you at home so that you can take a look. And we are right now on the page that starts with Gimel. Here we go. And the Shulchan Aruch, of course, are codified messages that we've learned from Rav Yosef Karo. And Rav Yosef Karo looked at the Rishonim and then the Gemara and Rishonim and codified. So you'll see a language here, which is really a blend of things. And the second seif, there's Siman Taf Lamed Aleph, the halachos of Zman B'dikas Chametz. There, the Shulchan Aruch writes as follows: B'tchilas Leil Yudalid, at the beginning of the night. Notice that he doesn't say or. At the beginning of the night of Yudalid, Bodkin es HaChametz Le'or Haner. We check chametz le'or haner with a candle. Where? The choron of istakin. All cracks and crevices in your kitchen, anywhere you got to look, you got to find the chametz. Provided that, catching the language from our Mishnah, remember that line from our Mishnah. We only do b'dikas chametz when we need to do b'dikas chametz. So that's line number 1. And take a look at the Mishnah Brura toward the bottom. It's underlined here. The Seif Katan Aleph b'tchilas leil. Perush, when should we do the mitzvah of b'dikas chametz? Hold this in your memory for 118 more days. Teikef achar yitzias hakochavim. Immediately after the stars come out. That's what we would call Teis HaKochavim. Today in America, we typically follow the sheet of Rav Moshe Feinstein that 50 minutes is considered as dark as it gets in America. It's not true in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, the sun sets faster, closer to the equator. There, the poskim say 35 minutes is about as dark as it gets. But let's continue in the Mishnah Brura. Teikev achar yetzias kochavim sheyesh adayin ktsas ma'or hayom. So he's talking a little differently. There's still a little bit of light. Ra'ui lahaschil livdok kedei shelo yisrashel o shelo yishkach. We're afraid you might forget. Start right when you get home from shul. Fine. Next, Seif Katan, Bodkin. What Seif Katan base Bodkin? V'gam tzarich levatel az es hachametz. At that time, you do say bittul. I call chamir v'chamir dika b'rshusi, etc. Uchadilakaman b'simin taf lamadal Seif base umin haTorah be'echad mehen sagi. This is a quote from the Ran. The Ran was of the opinion that you only need to do one to fulfill your biblical obligations, and we will. Where's the rest of this? Oh, yeah, sorry. Now turn over to the next page there. So there, at the top of that page in the middle of the line, it also says, Lo yilmo ve'afilu im yesh lo eis kavua lilmod. Even if you have a set time to learn, lo yilmad ad sheyivdok. You should not learn until you've checked. But let's say the Daf Yomi was like mamish during b'dikas chametz. We should push off Daf Yomi that night. Even if you have an eis kavua lilmod, you should push it off. Lo yilmod ad sheyivdok. And in fact, the Shulchan Aruch continues, top line, V'im hischel lilmod mi be'ojom. If you started, ein tzarich lahafsik, you don't need to stop. However, v'yesh omrim, the Rama, seemingly the Rama interjects, shetzarich lahafsik v'chein nir li'ikr. And if you look at the Mishnah Brura on the bottom, underlined, Seif Katan Zayin, the Mishnah Brura writes, Lo yomad gam bazeh yesh osrin af b'chatzi shah shemikodem. You are not supposed to start learning even 30 minutes prior to the Zman of B'dikas Chametz. Dilma asi le'amshuche harbe, that's our Gemara. We're afraid that you're going to get engrossed in your learning, etc., etc. Imlo, unless shebikesh le'echad shiaz kirenu k'sheyavo hazman, unless you have a reminder, then you're allowed to learn. Okay, so we just have to be careful about that. But the point of showing you this highlight is that what we are learning is very halacha l'maisa. What we've learned so far is this is practical stuff here. We need to know exactly when to do bdikas chametz. We know that it's in the very, very early parts of the night. You're not allowed to interrupt with other things. You got to get it done. Let's continue in the Gemara. That was Abaye here who said that you're not allowed to learn. We are now 2/3 of the way down. We're going to get into a few halachic sugyas about bdikas chametz, now with our assumption, of course. Now we're done asking. Now we know that it's on the night of, and we're not asking why anymore. Says the Gemara, Bo mine me Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. A question was asked of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Hamaskir ba'is lechaver ba'arba asar. You come rent my house. I'm giving you space. I'm renting you my house on the 14th of Nisan. Al mi livdo. Who has the burden? Who has the mitzvah to do bdikas chametz on this property? Okay, I own the house. Outright, I pay the mortgage company, and you pay me rent. Now you come into my house on the 14th of Nisan. Who has the mitzvah of bdikas chametz? So says the Gemara, Al hamaskir livdog. Do we say that it's on the owner of the house? The chamira didehu. Chamira is a reference to bread, to his food. It's his food. O dilma, or perhaps al hasocher livdog the isura birshusekai. Maybe the burden of responsibility to check the mitzvah derabanan is on the renter. The isura birshusekai, because it's in his house. The food's in his house. So he should be the one who's held accountable. Why? I'm living here right now. It's me. I'm in the house. You've got a loaf of bread on the counter. That's my problem. I don't own it, but I may have a desire to eat it. And that's not good either. So whose responsibility is it? So as the Gemara often does, we try to learn from another outside source, from an unrelated sugya, to see if we can connect the two. And let's see if we're able to do so here. Tashma. Let's give a similar case, but in a different area of halacha. Hamasker ba'is lechaveiro. It's my house. You're renting my house. Al hasocher. It is on you who rent the house. La'asos lo mezuzah. So says the Gemara, I have my comparison. You wanted to know who should do bdikas chametz when you rent my house. Well, if you rent my house, you have to put up a mezuzah. So maybe when you rent my house, you have to do bdikas chametz. Says the Gemara, no way. That does not work. Why? Because the world of mezuzah has an extremely unique din that applies pretty much only to it. And what is that? Hasam, says the Gemara, by mezuzah, Hasam ha'amar of misharshia, mezuzah chovas hadarhi. This is a fundamental aspect of the world of mezuzah, a lamdish idea which we'll speak about, I believe, in Menachos, but in other places for sure, in Avodah Zarah and in Bava Metzia and in Menachos. We'll get there when we get there. And it's just basically that there's a chovas hadar. The din of mezuzah is always going to be on the chovas hadar, but it's a unique din. So maybe we would apply loosely the principle of ein lecha bo'el chidusho. Because we have a mechudesh din by the world of mezuzah, you can't extrapolate from mezuzah back to the world of chametz, to bdikas chametz. No connection. So therefore, says the Gemara, hachamai, what then should we do here? Amar Luhu Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, he answered straight up. You asked the question of me, I'm going to answer the question directly to you. Tanina, we have a Tanaic source. What does the Tanaic source say? Hamasker ba'is lechaveiro, I'm renting you my house. Im ad shelo masar lo maftechos, I have yet to give you the keys. Then chal arba asar. If the 14th of Nisan kicks in without me having given you the keys yet, ala masker livdog, that's on me. The starting point of the bedika was while I still had the keys, I have to do the bedika. However, I gave you the keys on the 12th, the 13th, the 10th of Nisan. Then you walk into the house on the 14th. Then Allah socher livdot. The Gemara concludes with that quoted in Shulchan Aruch accordingly. Another case. Another question was asked to the same person. You rent my house on the 14th. You knock on my door and say, hey, do you have an extra apartment for me to live in? I say, sure, no problem. It's the basement apartment. Here are the keys. And you walk downstairs. Chezkaso baduk, o ein chezkaso baduk. If you're renting, what would you assume about that property? Do you assume in a halachic frame that there's no mitzvah derabanan to do bdika because it's already checked? Or do we have to assume halachically that it's eino baduk, there's a chazaka, that there's no badika, and therefore I'm chayiv to check? It's not a loose question. The language of chazaka is a very strong question. What is the halachic reality of your property? Is it muchzak to be checked, and therefore I have nothing to do? I'm just scot-free, I'm good? Or do we say, it's a chazaka, eino baduk, we don't trust the guy? What's the default position? Is the default position that the property is checked or not? Says the Gemara, Lamai nafkamino, what is the big deal? You just rented the house from me. Le shaila, go ask him. I'm standing right here. Phil, did you clean the house? Yes, no, whatever it is. Says the Gemara, I want a pure answer. I don't want to intervene. I don't want to know what this guy did. The guy's not around to ask anymore. The landlord's not there. I want to know, what is the standing assumption when you rent an apartment on the 14th of Nisan? Is it chezkas baduk or chezkas eino baduk? Do we assume that it's a place that was checked already, or do we assume that it was not checked? And li'ichruche lahai mai. What is the burden upon the socher? Is he obligated to do another b'dika? That's the question at hand. Amar lahu Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Tani Tua. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak was asked the question and he answered it. He's holding. So what does he say? Hakol ne'am, quoting from the Tanaim. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak was an Amora, so he's quoting Tani Tua as a language of referencing Tanaim. Hakol ne'emanim al biur chametz. Everyone is agreed about biur chametz. Also, of course, referencing b'dika. You can't burn what you don't collect. So hakol ne'emanim al biur chametz. Even though nashim, avadim, and ktanim, who are generally speaking not reliable as it relates to the halachic stance of being an aid, but here we do allow for them to give testimony. So this is the proof that Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak gave. So my time mehemne. What's the reason why they're believed? Turning to the top of Dalet Amud Beis. So it says the Gemara, the reason why they're believed is because Lav Mishum Dechezkaso Baduk. Normally, we don't rely on Nashim Avadim and Ketanim to be Eidim. So it must be, says Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, that this brisa is referring to a case where it's Chezkaso Baduk. And because it's Chezkaso Baduk, so therefore we can rely on the light version of testimony of the Nashim Avadim and Ketanim. Dikasavar, what is the assumption? Hakol Chaverim Heimetzel B'dikas Chametz. We have a standing assumption by B'dikas Chametz that everyone is a Chaver. Now, the word chaver in halacha is a person who is considered a person who's a very committed Jew. He keeps halacha to the T. He's doing everything right. So this chaver, it's just like we would say by tevel, by untithed food. We trust him. Tanya. What does the brisa say? I might have skipped a word there. Kasavar hakol chaverim ahem eitzel b'dikas chametz. Everyone is considered reliable as it relates to b'dikas chametz. Tanya, the brisa writes, chaver shemeis v'hiniach megurim alei peros. Let's say there was a person who was a chaver. Top shelf individual. He's great. He does everything right. That morning, he plucked fruits from the tree, vegetables, whatever it is. Afilu hein b'nei yoman, even if they were picked that day and he died that day, we still can assume harei hein b'chezkas mesukanin. We can still assume that those payros are fixed. What does that mean for our case? That means that why do we say that Nashim Avadim and Ketanim are believed? Because the case is a case of Chezkas Baduk. You asked me, when I go into your apartment on the 14th, is it Baduk or not? Says Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, based on a brisa, Chezkas Baduk. I have no mitzvah of B'dikas Chametz. You have no mitzvah of B'dikas Chametz when you rent from me, because I'm a chaver. As long as I'm a top shelf Jew, so you don't have to worry about it. Everything is assumed to be done. No need to do B'dikas Chametz. Says the Gemara, why would you learn the brisa that way? Umimai. Why would you learn the brisa that way? Dilma shayni hacha mishum deka amrei hani. Maybe here it's different because you actually got testimony from people. And maybe had they not said something, it would have been a problem. Says the Gemara, Atu amira tahani midi mishasha isbe. But these witnesses, they're not valid witnesses. We don't rely on Nashim Avadim and Ketanim. We do rely on them in plenty of scenarios. We rely on Nashim in regards to Hilchos Nida. That's Yisurei Karesh. The lack of trusting for women in regards to, this is just a sidebar, but an important comment. It's not a qualitative question. Women have the capacity to be an aid for things that are divrei kares. It's not personal. There's a drasha that excludes women from aidus. So that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about, it's not a character assassination, a gender issue. It is the way that the psukim derive who can do what. So here the Gemara says, Atu amir dahani midim shasha isbe. Their aidus doesn't work. So it says Gemara, Elamai, what must it be to chezkaso baduk? If what you're saying is that the Mishnah is chezkaso baduk even without their testimony, so then your Mishnah should have said something different. Hi hakol ne'emanim. The brisa that you quoted on the bottom of the previous summit, why does it say hakol ne'emanim? We don't care if they're ne'eman. We don't care because it's chezkaso baduk. It should have said kol abatim bechezkas badukim barbasar mi baile. You shouldn't have said the brisa to say, I trust Nashim Avadim and Ketanim because it's Chezkaso Baduk. If their aegis is not relevant, change the language. Why does it say Hakol Ne'eman? And we don't care if they're Ne'eman. It's just Chezkas Baduk. Makes no difference. So therefore, Elamai, what do you want to say? Mishum Amira Dahani. You want to say that it's because they gave aegis? Is that even possible? And therefore, Halo Amre Hani Lo. What if they wouldn't have said anything? Then would it have not have been considered baduk? Says the Gemara, Tifshot Minei, by virtue of the fact that you included men, women, and children, you included Nashim Avadim and Ktanim, because you included them, that shows me that their edus is a something, which implies that if they don't give edus, tifshut minei, what will we learn? Dein chazkas baduk. Exact opposite of what you're trying to prove. Then it seems to be that ein chazkas baduk. Says Gemara, no. We're about 12 lines down. Daled Amid Beis says Gemara, lo. Le'olam eima la chazkas baduk. Really, in general, we assume it's chazkas baduk. So then what's going on here? If it's chazkas baduk, then why do I need hakol ne'eman? And why do I need these people in the brisa? They're not helpful. So it says the Gemara, what's the case that we are dealing with in the brisa? It is the muchzak lan de lo badak. These people, generally speaking, with a chaver, with a regular yid, someone who's a good person, they know what they're doing. We assume that they did bdikas chametz. In this case, we have a chazaka that they did not do their job. They did not do their job. We have a chazaka here, de lo badak. And here, under this circumstance, v'ka'am rehani bidkine, that's when we rely on the nashim avadim and ktanim. So again, normally we say chazkas baduk. This is a case where I know the guy who lives in that house doesn't know what he's talking about. So that house is ein chazkas baduk. But then if nashim avadim and ktanim, if one of them say, no, I saw them bring in a cleaning crew, they brought out bags of Cheerios and they brought out all the chametz, then we believe them. Ma'u detema, what might I have thought? Lo lehem ninhu rabbanan. Maybe we would not believe them in this case. Maybe the rabbis would have rejected their testimony here. Kamash malan, kevan de bdikas chametz midirabanan hu, because the mitzvah of chametz is midirabanan. Such a key line. The next 5 words are so important. De midirabanan, de midoraisa, bebittel be'alma sagile, because at the very least, we know that you're yotze with all of your burdens and responsibilities just by doing bittul. Then hemnuhu rabbanan bidirabanan. So what do we see here from the Gemara? We answered a couple of questions. We started with our question at the bottom of the page here. What is the natural standing assumption of someone's apartment when you rent it? The Gemara's answer, chazkaso baduk. We assume that the apartment is considered to be checked. You have no mitzvah derabanan, no chiyuv. You have no obligation to do anything in that apartment. Move in and keep Pesach. You're fine. No bdikas chametz required. If you happen to know that the person's not, they don't know what they're talking about. So then if you have edus from avadim, nashim, tanim, and of course for men as well, so then fine, you're allowed to use it. Nashim, avadim, tanim are not viable edim. Yes, but in this case they are, because you're balancing the mitzvah derabanan of bdikas chametz against the typical non-usage of nashim, avadim, and tanim for edus, and it balances out totally fine. We are now, I'm on the wrong page. Here we go. We are now approximately 1/3 of the way down, halfway down almost. Ibaya lahu, another case, another question to be asked. Hamaskir ba'is lechaver b'chezkas baduk. Now we're taking it a step further. You rent my house and it's b'chezkas baduk. Umitzao she'eno baduk. You rent my house, we sign a contract. You're renting my house, this is my house, here's my address. I'm telling you in the contract, house was clean for Pesach. You walk inside, there's chametz all over the place. Mahu, what is the din? Do we say, mi have kimekach ta'os ulo, olo? A mekach ta'os in halacha is when you make a purchase, but the conditions of the purchase were not fulfilled. I ask you for a blue car and you bring me a white one. Conditions not fulfilled. I ask you for a car that has less than 10,000 miles. You bring me a car with 20,000 miles. The whole contract is null and void. No transactions have transpired. Zero. Nothing. Okay? You rented my apartment. I told you it was clean. It's dirty. Do we say this is a mekach ta'os or not? Seems pretty obvious off the cuff. We would have assumed it was a mekach ta'os. Let's see how the Gemara answers. Toshma. Let's see what the Gemara says to Omar Abaye. Lomi baya. I would not need you to tell me be'asra de lo yahave agra, in a place where you don't hire someone, where you don't give money, ubadku, and you check it yourself. The nichale leinish likyume mitzvah begufe. Even in a case where someone would have to do all the work themselves, we would still say it's not a mekach ta'os. Adds the Gemara, ela afilu be'asra diyave agrabak. Even if you have to pay someone to do it, we still would assume that that's not considered a mekach ta'os. It's not inherent in the apartment. Yes, I was wrong in my contract, but it doesn't make null and void the contract, because people like doing these types of things. This is a mitzvah. Hopefully we like doing mitzvahs. So says the Gemara, it's not a mekach ta'os. What's implied from the Gemara, if there was a condition similar to this, for example, I'm giving you a clean house, not a chametz, just a clean house. That might be a mekach ta'os, because you're not cleaning for a mitzvah, you're cleaning stam. There's just an inference to make from the Gemara. We're going to learn one more sugya and wrap up to the top of Hamid Aleph. The reason we're doing that is because Thursdays are blot and a half days, and I need to save as much time on Thursdays as I can. So we're going to wrap up about the top 10 lines of Daf Hamad Aleph, and then we'll stop. You'll still make Marv tonight if you're davening at the 9:30. We're at the 2 dots, 2/3 of the way down. Let's get into a very, very central sugya in Maseches Pesachim about when we have to stop eating chametz. We mentioned it once already, and we're going to mention it again now. It's not Hassam. We have a Mishnah that's going to be learned later on in the Masechta. Reb Meir says, Ochlen kol chametz, you can eat chametz all of the 5th hour on the 14th of Nisan. This sorfen b'tchilas sheish, you burn it in the beginning of the 6th, and at the end of the 6th, beginning of the 7th, is when the Isser de'oraisa of achilas chametz triggers. Shitas Reb Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ochlen kol arba, he pushes the Isser de'rabanan back yet another hour. You're allowed to eat the whole 4th hour. The tolen kol chamesh, in the 5th hour, you don't do anything. And the sorfen b'tchilas sheish, you do sreif on the chametz at the beginning of the 6th hour, and again by the end of the 7th hour, that's when the Isser Doraisa kicks in of achilas chametz. So says the Gemara, what's the common denominator between the tzad hashavah sheben? Says the Gemara, dekuli alma miha chametz misheisho sulam ala aser. Everyone agrees that once we get to 6 hours on the day, the halacha is midoraisa you're not allowed to eat chametz. Minolan, where do we know this from? Very important halacha because it's so unique. We have no other cases midoraisa where you have an Isser D'oraisa status that kicks in at hour 6. These are not normal halachos. It only applies here. Minolan, how do we know this? Amar Abaye, we know this from 2 psukim that don't seem to make sense with one another until we hear Abaye's explanation. Amar Abaye, Trei Kra'e Ksive. There are 2 verses that are written. Ksiv, one pasuk says, follow carefully in the language because we're going to pick on it in a moment. Number 1, Shivas Yamim Se'or Lo Yimatze Bevatechem. 7 days you're not allowed to have chametz in your house. And the next pasuk, uksiv ach b'yom harishon, on the first day, seemingly the first of the 7 days, tashbisu se'or mibatechem. On the first day, you should get rid of it. Well, hold on 1 second. You just said all 7 days were chametz free. Now I have to. The first pasuk says 7 days are chametz free. The second pasuk says do the tashbisu, destroy your chametz on day 1. That's a contradiction to the first pasuk. So how do we understand the 2 psukim together? So answers the Gemara, HaKetzad, how do we understand these psukim? They don't make sense. Answers the Gemara, what does the second pasuk mean when it says B'yom Rishon? B'yom Rishon doesn't mean the first of the 7 days. It means before the 7 days. So not starting with the 15th through the 22nd of Nisan where there's an Isser Chametz, but going back to the day before the 15th, on the 14th, we know that on that day that there's going to be an Isser Chametz. L'rabos arba'asar lebiur. That on that day is the day you have to destroy all of your Chametz, and hinted to here, though not said explicitly, you not only have to burn it, but it becomes usher to eat as well. Okay. The Ema, maybe we could have argued, L'rabos lele chamisha asar lebir. Maybe we could have argued that bir chametz wasn't to be brought back to the 14th during the day. Maybe it was just meant to be before the day of the 15th, at the night of the 15th. You know, the night by the Pesach Seder, that's not daytime. Maybe we should assume that the Torah didn't mean that the Isser of Achilas Chametz starts during the day on the 14th. It just means before the day of the 15th. Well, what's before the day of the 15th? The night of the 15th. Says the Gemara, the Sel Kadaita Chamina, 3 lines from the bottom. I might have thought, Yomim Ksiv. The Pasuk says, Shivas Yomim, 7 days. Yomim in. Yes, the 8 days, that's when there's an Isser to own Chametz, and therefore we need to make sure we get rid of it. Laylo slow, but at night, that's not a problem. And maybe therefore we should do bdikas chametz, not bdikas chametz. Maybe we should do biur chametz on the night of the 15th, right before we do achilas matzah. Says the Gemara, kamash malan afilu leilos. What we learn from the psukim is that no, that's not correct. Is that we even include the nights in the isser of owning chametz and achilas chametz. Says the Gemara. Hold on 1 second, Ahu. This whole drasha that you made lo isrichale. I don't need a pasuk to tell me that the night of the 15th is a night in which you're not allowed to have chametz. You're literally having the Pesach Seder. Of course you can't have chametz in your house. But the Gemara presents it in a much more sophisticated fashion by giving a double hekesh, a double comparison to teach us that this is the case. Deha, says the Gemara, top of Hamad Aleph, Deha iskash hashbasas seor la'achilas chametz. There's an equation made of the destruction of chametz, hashbasas seor la'achilas chametz, to the isser of eating chametz, and then a second hekesh of achilas chametz la'achilas matzah. Let's see what these 2 connections are. And all of this is speaking about the night of the 15th, the Pesach Seder night. Hashbasas seor la'achilas chametz. What's the link between destroying chametz and the isser of eating chametz? Dichsi shivas yamim seor lo yimatze bevatechem. 7 days you're not allowed to have chametz in your house. That's issue one. That's hashpasas seor. Because kichol ochel machmetzes v'nichrasa. We see that the destruction of the chametz and the Yisur Achila of the chametz are put in the same camp. And then, fifth line, the Achilas chametz, the Achilas matzah, we see those two things are put together as well. The eating of chametz, the Yisur of eating of chametz, and the mitzvah of eating matzah also can't coexist. How so? Dichsiv, the pasuk writes, Kol machmetzes lo sochil b'chol moshvosechem. You're not allowed to have any leavened bread within your camp. And as well, tochlu matzos. Uchsiv bei b'matzah, but erev tochlu matzos. We know that you're supposed to eat matzah at night. So you gave me from a pasuk that the nights are exempt. You thought we should make a diuk, yamim in leilos lo. Maybe we should do biur chametz the night of the 15th. Says more, we can't do that. That doesn't work because this double hekesh teaches me here is what cannot coexist: chametz and matzah. And we know be'erev tochlu matzos, on the night of the 15th we eat matzah. By definition, it's already usher to own chametz, and then by definition, you cannot do biur chametz at that time. It has to be done earlier. Therefore, it must be done in the earlier days. So says the Gemara. Well, hold on 1 second. The aim of the rabbos. Maybe we should say leil yodale lebir. Maybe we should destroy the chametz on the night when we do bdikas chametz on the 14th. We do bdikas chametz and beer. We don't do that, right? We do beer the next day. Says Gemara, we can't do that. B'yom ksiv. We know that this isser of chametz begins during the day. The ema mitzafra. Maybe we should assume that the isser deoraisa of chametz starts in the morning, right when you get up. Last two words for the day, but very important words. The pasuk says, if you look at the pasuk the second pasuk that was quoted by Abaye, 6 lines from the bottom on Dalet Amud Beis, the pasuk says, bayom harishon, chilek. Teaches me to split the day in half, so it does not start by the morning. It starts at the middle of the day, and therefore, everyone agrees, Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, that we are not allowed to eat chametz starting at the middle of the day on the 14th. It cannot be on the 15th because of the double hekesh, because you cannot have coexisting matzah and chametz, and therefore we know that it starts in the middle of the day on the 14th. We'll stop with this on Shabbos. Imir Hashem, we'll do approximately a blot and a half. We'll do all of Daf Hey and Daf Vav Amud Aleph, and then that's what's today? Today's Wednesday. Tomorrow night we'll do a blot and a half. Shabbos as well, we'll do a blot and a half, and then Sunday we're back to 1 blot. Have a beautiful night.